December 7, 1941. Pearl Harbor burns. As smoke billows from the twisted wreckage of battleships and the screams of wounded sailors pierce the Hawaiian morning air, Japanese Zero pilots circle overhead like predators surveying their kill. They've just pulled off one of the most devastating surprise attacks in military history, and their confidence sources as high as their aircraft. In their minds, American aviation is a joke. Slow, clumsy, piloted by soft men from a soft nation. They've heard whispers of a strange new American fighter with twin engines and twin tails. Something the Americans call the P-38 Lightning. The Japanese pilots laugh. Another desperate American attempt to catch up to the superior Zero. They think another failure waiting to happen. They have no idea they're looking at their future executioner. Historical context. The year 1941 finds the world ablaze. Hitler's Wehrmacht storms across Europe while his Luftwaffe darkens the skies over Britain. In the Pacific, the rising sun of Imperial Japan casts its shadow across vast stretches of ocean from the home islands to the newly conquered territories of Southeast Asia. At the center of Japan's aerial supremacy sits the Mitsubishi A6 Bandu, a fighter so advanced, so agile that it seems almost supernatural to those who face it in combat. The Zero isn't just an airplane. It's a philosophy made manifest. Every rivet, every curve speaks to the Japanese concept of perfection through sacrifice. Weighing barely 5,300 lb when fully loaded, the Zero can turn on a dime, climb like a rocket, and outmaneuver virtually any Allied fighter in the sky. Its 20 mm cannons and twin 7.7 mm machine guns pack enough punch to shred enemy aircraft, while its incredible range allows it to escort bombers on missions that seem impossible to Western military minds. But this superiority comes at a cost that reflects the very soul of Imperial Japan. The Zero achieves its performance by sacrificing pilot protection. No armor plating shields the pilot from enemy fire. No self-sealing fuel tanks prevent catastrophic fires. The Zero is fast and deadly, but it's also fragile. A glass sword that cuts deep but shatters easily. This design philosophy mirrors the Japanese military doctrine itself. Victory through spiritual superiority and tactical brilliance, even if it means accepting terrible losses. Meanwhile, across the Pacific, American aviation struggles in the shadow of European priorities. The United States Army Air Forces find themselves equipped with fighters that seem almost quaint compared to the Zero. The Curtiss P-40 Warhawk, America's primary fighter in the Pacific, is rugged and reliable, but hopelessly outclassed in speed and maneuverability. The Bell P-39 Airacobra with its unusual mid-mounted engine proves effective against ground targets, but struggles in air-to-air combat at high altitudes. These aircraft, designed in an era when air combat meant slower speeds and lower altitudes, suddenly find themselves facing an enemy that has leaped a generation ahead. The disparity becomes brutally clear in the early months of 1942. At Pearl Harbor, Japanese pilots destroy or damage over 300 American aircraft, most caught helplessly on the ground. In the Philippines, General Douglas MacArthur's air forces evaporate under the relentless assault of Zero fighters and twin-engine bombers. The Dutch East Indies fall, then Singapore, then Burma. Everywhere American and Allied pilots meet the Zero in combat, the results follow a predictable pattern. The Zero climbs higher, turns tighter, and strikes faster. But even as the Japanese military machine rolls across the Pacific like an unstoppable tide, a different kind of revolution is taking shape in the factories and design studios of Southern California. Here in the sprawling facilities of Lockheed Aircraft Corporation, a team of engineers led by the brilliant Clarence Kelly Johnson is putting the finishing touches on what they hope will be America's answer to the Zero. The Lockheed P-38 Lightning represents everything the Zero is not. Where the Zero sacrifices protection for performance, the Lightning wraps its pilot in armor plating and bulletproof glass. Where the Zero relies on a single engine for power, the Lightning mounts two massive Allison V1710 engines, each producing over 400 horsepower. Where the Zero's conventional design speaks to evolutionary refinement, the Lightning's twin-boom configuration announces a revolutionary leap forward. Rising tension. The first time Japanese intelligence officers see photographs of the P-38, Their reaction is swift and dismissive. The aircraft looks like something from a science fiction magazine. Twin engines mounted on separate booms, connected by a central nell housing the pilot and armament. The Japanese call it Futago no Akuma, the Twin Devil, but the name carries more mockery than fear. How could such an ungainly contraption possibly threaten the elegant, refined Zero? This confidence isn't entirely misplaced. Early encounters between P-38s and Japanese fighters in 1942 often favor the Zero pilots. The Lightning pilots, fresh from training schools in the American heartland, find themselves facing combat veterans who have been fighting in China since 1937. These Japanese aces know every trick of aerial combat, every way to exploit an enemy's weakness. They've perfected the art of the turning fight, using the Zero's incredible maneuverability to force opponents into deadly spirals that end with 20 MARV cannon shells tearing through cockpits. Lieutenant Saburo Sakai, already one of Japan's most celebrated aces with over 30 confirmed kills, encounters his first P-38 over Guadalcanal in August 1942. The Lightning pilot, probably a young American barely out of flight school, makes the classic mistake of trying to turn with Sakai's Zero. The Japanese ace smiles behind his oxygen mask as he pulls his fighter into a climbing turn that would black out most pilots. The P-38, heavier and less agile, can't match the maneuver. Within minutes, Sakai has positioned himself perfectly for a killing shot. But something unexpected happens. As Sakai closes in for the kill, the P-38 suddenly accelerates away from him with shocking speed. The Lightning's twin engines, each more powerful than the Zero's single power plant, give it a straight-line speed advantage that the Japanese pilot has never encountered. Sakai pushes his throttle forward, but the Zero simply can't match the Lightning's acceleration. He watches in frustration as his target disappears into the distance, probably heading back to Henderson Field to fight another day. This scene plays out repeatedly across the Pacific as 1942 turns into 1943. Japanese pilots accustomed to dominating every engagement find themselves facing an opponent that refuses to play by the established rules. The P-38 won't turn fight where the Zero holds every advantage. Instead, Lightning pilots develop new tactics that exploit their aircraft's unique strength, superior speed, devastating firepower, and the ability to climb rapidly to altitudes where the Zero's performance begins to suffer. The Lightning's armament represents another revolutionary departure from conventional fighter design. Instead of wing-mounted guns that require pilots to account for convergence angles and ammunition mixing, the P-38 mounts all its weapons in the nose. 120 mm cannon and 4 50 caliber machine guns, all firing straight ahead along the aircraft center line. When a Lightning pilot pulls the trigger, he unleashes a concentrated stream of destruction that can tear apart enemy aircraft with surgical precision. American pilots begin to learn that the key to defeating the Zero isn't to match its strengths, but to impose their own advantages. The boom and zoom tactic becomes the Lightning signature. Dive down from altitude, make a high-speed attack, then climb back up before the Zero can respond. It's a strategy that requires discipline and patience, qualities that American pilots, trained in the methodical traditions of their military, possess in abundance. The human angle. Second Lieutenant Richard Dick Bong arrives in the Pacific Theater in September 1942, fresh from advanced fighter training in California. At 22, he looks even younger with the kind of innocent face that belongs in a high school yearbook rather than a fighter cockpit. His fellow pilots in the 49th Fighter Group take one look at this farm boy from Wisconsin and wonder if he'll survive his first week of combat. Bong's first encounter with Japanese fighters comes over New Guinea, where the 49th Fighter Group is tasked with providing air cover for Australian ground forces. As his flight of P-38s climbs toward their patrol altitude, Bong spots a formation of Japanese bombers escorted by Zero fighters. His flight leader, a veteran with several months of Pacific combat experience, signals for the attack. What happens next will be repeated hundreds of times over the next 2 years, but this first engagement sets the pattern. Bong positions his Lightning above and behind the Japanese formation, using the sun to mask his approach. When he dives, his P-38 accelerates to over 400 mph, far faster than any Zero can match. His target, a twin-engine bomber, grows rapidly in his gun sight. The concentrated firepower of the Lightning's nose-mounted weapons proves devastating. Bong's first burst tears through the bomber's right engine, sending pieces of metal spinning away into the slipstream. His second burst finds the fuel tanks, and the Japanese aircraft explodes in a ball of orange flame that briefly outshines the tropical sun. Bong pulls up sharply, his P-38's powerful engines carrying him back to safety before the escorting Zeros can react. But it's not just the mechanical advantages that begin to tip the balance. American pilots bring something to the Pacific War that their Japanese counterparts, for all their skill and experience, cannot match. An industrial support system that seems almost magical in its abundance. When a Lightning returns from a mission with battle damage, teams of mechanics swarm over it with replacement parts, tools, and expertise. Damaged engines are swapped out overnight. Bullet holes are patched with aluminum plates cut to precise specifications. Electronics are repaired or replaced with components that roll off American production lines in seemingly endless quantities. The contrast with Japanese maintenance capabilities becomes stark as 1943 progresses. Zero fighters that once seemed invincible begin showing signs of wear and improvised repairs. Replacement parts become scarce, forcing mechanics to cannibalize damaged aircraft to keep others flying. Most critically, the pool of experienced Japanese pilots begins to shrink as combat losses mount, and training programs struggle to replace veteran aviators. Technological revolution. The P-38's technological advantages extend far beyond raw speed and firepower. The Lightning's twin-engine configuration provides redundancy that proves invaluable over the vast distances of Pacific combat. When a Zero takes battle damage to its single engine, the pilot faces a stark choice: attempt a dangerous landing on a hostile island or ditch in shark-infested waters. When a Lightning loses an engine, the pilot can often make it home on the remaining power plant, living to fight another day. The aircraft's high-altitude performance becomes particularly important as the war progresses. The Lightning's turbocharged engines maintain their power output at altitudes where the Zero's naturally aspirated engine begins to gasp for air. At 25 Zos, in fact, a P-38 can outrun, outclimb, and outgun any Japanese fighter in the sky. This altitude advantage allows Lightning pilots to choose when and where to engage, controlling the tempo of aerial combat in a way that Japanese pilots find increasingly frustrating. Perhaps most importantly, the P-38's range capabilities begin to shift the strategic balance of the Pacific War. The Lightning can escort bombers on missions that stretch over 500 km, far beyond the reach of shorter-ranged fighters. This extended range allows American forces to strike targets deep in Japanese-held territory while maintaining fighter protection, a capability that proves crucial as the island-hopping campaign gains momentum. The psychological impact of these technological advantages cannot be overstated. Japanese pilots who once approached every engagement with supreme confidence now find themselves looking over their shoulders, scanning the sky for the distinctive twin-boom silhouette of approaching Lightnings. The aircraft they once mocked as ungainly and ineffective has become a symbol of American industrial might and technological innovation, building to climax. By early 1943, the laughter has died in Japanese fighter squadrons across the Pacific. Intelligence reports filtering back to Tokyo paint an increasingly grim picture. American P-38 squadrons are achieving kill ratios that historical context Zero supremacy seem almost impossible. Where Japanese pilots once expected to down 3 or 4 American fighters for every Zero lost, they now find themselves facing opponents who strike with devastating effectiveness and disappear before retaliation is possible. The transformation becomes particularly evident in the skies over the Solomon Islands, where the struggle for Guadalcanal has evolved into a broader campaign for control of the entire island chain. Here in the crucible of daily combat, American Lightning pilots perfect the tactics that will eventually sweep Japanese aviation from Pacific skies. Major Thomas Maguire, another young American pilot, who will eventually become one of the war's leading aces, describes the evolution in a letter to his wife. The Japs used to come at us like they own the sky. Now they're cautious, defensive. They know we can hurt them and they're starting to show it. The P-38 has given us something we never had before, the ability to fight on our terms instead of theirs. But the real test is yet to come. As 1943 progresses toward its climactic battles, both sides prepare for confrontations that will determine the future of aerial warfare in the Pacific. The Japanese, recognizing the threat posed by the Lightning, begin developing new tactics and aircraft designed specifically to counter American advantages. The Americans, meanwhile, continue refining their techniques while new squadrons of P-38s arrive in theater, with pilots trained specifically in the boom and zoom tactics that exploit the Lightning's strengths. The stage is set for a series of aerial battles that will prove once and for all whether Japanese confidence in their pilots and aircraft is justified, or whether American industrial might and technological innovation can overcome the warrior traditions of the samurai. In the skies above the Pacific, the laughter has stopped. Now comes the reckoning. The twin-tailed devil that Japanese pilots once dismissed as a curiosity is about to show its true nature. And when it does, the balance of power in the Pacific War will shift forever, written in contrails and punctuated by the thunder of twin Allison engines diving out of the sun. The crucible of combat, April 18, 1943. High above Bougainville Island, 16 P-38 Lightnings streak through the morning sky at 20,000. Their twin engines leaving 4 parallel contrails against the azure Pacific backdrop. Leading this formation is Major John Mitchell, a veteran pilot whose calm demeanor masks the intensity of the mission ahead. Today, the Lightning will face its ultimate test, not against ordinary Japanese fighters, but against the architect of Pearl Harbor himself. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, the brilliant strategist who planned Japan's surprise attack on Pearl Harbor, is flying to Bougainville for a morale-boosting tour of forward bases. American Costa-Ricans have intercepted his flight plan and 18 carefully selected P-38 pilots have been tasked with what military planners euphemistically call interception. In reality, they're flying an assassination mission that will test every advantage the Lightning holds over Japanese aviation. The irony is profound. Yamamoto himself had warned his superiors that attacking America would awaken a sleeping giant. Now that giant's industrial might has produced the very weapon that will claim his life. A fighter aircraft that embodies everything he feared about American technological capability. As Mitchell's Lightnings approach the interception point, they spot their targets. 2 Mitsubishi G4M Betty bombers carrying Yamamoto and his staff escorted by 6 Zero fighters. The Japanese pilots flying a routine transport mission have no idea they're about to encounter the most precisely planned aerial ambush of the Pacific War. The Yamamoto mission, Captain Thomas Lanier Jr. flying as Mitchell's wingman spots the Japanese formation first. The 2 Betty bombers are flying low over the jungle canopy, exactly as intelligence predicted. Their Zero escorts weave lazily above them, the pilots probably more concerned with navigation than enemy fighters. After all, they're flying deep in Japanese-controlled airspace, hundreds of miles from the nearest American base. What the Japanese pilots don't realize is that the P-38's extraordinary range has made this mission possible. No other Allied fighter in the Pacific possesses the fuel capacity to fly 435 mi to the target area, engage in combat, and return safely to base. The Lightning's twin-boom design, which Japanese pilots once mocked as ungainly, houses fuel tanks that give it capabilities no single-engine fighter can match. The attack unfolds with devastating precision. Lanier and Lieutenant Rex Barber dive toward the bombers, while the rest of the formation engages the Zero escorts. The Japanese fighters, caught completely off guard, struggle to respond to the Lightning's superior speed and altitude advantage. In the turning fight that follows, the Zeros' legendary maneuverability proves useless against opponents who refuse to turn with them. Lanfear's P-38 closes on the lead Betty bomber with shocking speed. The Lightning's concentrated nose armament, 120 mm cannon, and 450 caliber machine guns unleashes a stream of destruction that no bomber can withstand. The Betty's right engine explodes in a geyser of flame and metal. The aircraft rolls inverted and plunges into the jungle below, carrying with it the man who planned Pearl Harbor. The second bomber suffers a similar fate under Barber's guns. Within minutes, both Bettys are burning wrecks in the Bougainville jungle, and the surviving Zero pilots are fleeing toward their home base, their confidence shattered by an encounter with an enemy they thought they understood. Does the human cost of supremacy? The death of Yamamoto sends shock waves through the Japanese military hierarchy. But the psychological impact extends far beyond the loss of a single leader. For Japanese pilots across the Pacific, the successful interception represents something far more troubling than tactical defeat. It demonstrates that American fighters can now strike anywhere, anytime with impunity. Lieutenant Hiroyoshi Nishiwa, one of Japan's most celebrated aces with over 80 confirmed victories, encounters this new reality firsthand during a mission over Rabaul in June 1943. Nishiwa, known to his fellow pilots as the Devil of Rabaul, has built his reputation on the Zero's superior maneuverability and his own exceptional flying skills. He's never met an American pilot who could match him in a turning fight. But when Nishiwa's formation encounters a squadron of P-38s over New Britain, the Americans refuse to play by the old rules. Instead of diving down to engage in the traditional dogfight, the Lightning pilots maintain their altitude advantage and attack in coordinated waves. Each attack run lasts only seconds. A high-speed dive, a devastating burst of gunfire, then a climb back to safety before the Zeros can respond. Nishiwa watches in frustration as his wingman Zero disintegrates under a Lightning's concentrated firepower. The American pilot who made the kill is already climbing away, his twin engines carrying him beyond the reach of retaliation. For the first time in his combat career, Nishiwa feels helpless. His superior flying skills mean nothing if he can't force his opponents to fight on his terms. The psychological transformation extends beyond individual pilots to entire squadrons. Japanese fighter units that once approached every mission with supreme confidence now find themselves looking nervously at empty sky, knowing that death can dive out of the sun at 400 miles without warning. The easy victories of 1942 become increasingly rare as American pilots learn to exploit every advantage their aircraft provides. Industrial warfare. Behind the tactical evolution lies a broader transformation that Japanese military leaders are only beginning to comprehend. The P-38 Lightning represents more than just a superior fighter aircraft. It embodies the full weight of American industrial capacity turned toward war production. In factories across the United States, the Lightning production line operates with an efficiency that would seem impossible to Japanese observers. Lockheed's Burbank facility alone produces over 200 P-38s per month by mid-1943, while additional production lines in other cities add to the total. Each aircraft rolls off the assembly line, equipped with the latest technological improvements. More powerful engines, better armor protection, improved radio equipment, and increasingly sophisticated armament. The contrast with Japanese production capabilities becomes starker with each passing month. While American factories churn out Lightnings by the hundreds, Japanese aircraft production struggles with material shortages, quality control problems, and the constant threat of American bombing raids. The Zero fighters that once seemed invincible now show signs of declining build quality as experienced workers are drafted into military service and critical materials become scarce. More importantly, the Americans are producing pilots at a rate that Japanese training programs cannot match. Flight schools across the United States graduate thousands of new aviators each month, many of them specifically trained in the tactics that maximize the P-38's advantages. These pilots arrive in the Pacific theater with hundreds of hours of flight time and extensive gunnery training, ready to implement the lessons learned by their predecessors. The aces emerge. It's in this environment of technological and tactical evolution that a new generation of American fighter aces begins to emerge. These pilots flying aircraft that finally match or exceed Japanese capabilities start achieving kill ratios that seem almost impossible to their predecessors who flew P-40s and P-39s in the dark days of 1942. Richard Bong, the quiet farm boy from Wisconsin, becomes the embodiment of this transformation. By the end of 1943, Bong has claimed 21 confirmed victories, making him one of America's leading aces. But more importantly, his success demonstrates how the P-38's capabilities can be maximized by pilots who understand both the aircraft's strengths and the enemy's weaknesses. Bong's typical engagement follows a pattern that becomes standard for Lightning pilots throughout the Pacific. Using the P-38's superior climb rate and high-altitude performance, he positions himself above Japanese formations before they detect his presence. When he attacks, it's with the devastating speed and firepower that the Lightning's design makes possible. And when Japanese fighters attempt to retaliate, Bong uses his aircraft's superior speed to disengage and climb back to altitude for another attack. The psychological impact on Japanese pilots becomes evident in their radio communications, which American intelligence intercepts and translates. Where once Japanese pilots reported engaging inferior American fighters, they now speak of twin-engine devils that strike without warning and disappear before retaliation is possible. The confident chatter that the Yamamoto mission first strike characterized Japanese radio traffic in 1942 gives way to worried exchanges between pilots who know they're facing an opponent they don't fully understand. As technological evolution of 1943 progresses into 1944, the P-38 Lightning continues to evolve, incorporating lessons learned from thousands of hours of Pacific combat. The P-38J model, which begins reaching squadrons in late 1943, addresses many of the early aircraft's limitations while enhancing its already formidable capabilities. The new model's improved engines produce over 1,600 horsepower each, giving the Lightning a top speed of nearly 420 mph, fast enough to catch any Japanese fighter in level flight. More importantly, the P-38J's enhanced high-altitude performance allows it to operate effectively at altitudes where Japanese fighters struggle to maintain power. But perhaps the most significant improvement comes in the form of new tactics and training programs developed specifically for Lightning pilots. American flight schools now teach energy management, the art of converting altitude and speed into tactical advantage. Students learn to think three-dimensionally using the Lightning's superior climb rate and dive speed to control the tempo of aerial combat. These tactical innovations prove their worth in the great air battles of 1944 as American forces begin their island-hopping campaign toward the Japanese home islands. Over the Marshall Islands, the Marianas, and eventually the Philippines, P-38 squadrons achieve kill ratios that exceed 10.1 against Japanese opposition. The aircraft that Japanese pilots once dismissed as a curiosity has become the instrument of their aerial defeat. The Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, June 19, 1944. The Philippine Sea stretches endlessly in all directions, its surface broken only by the wakes of the largest naval armada in history. Task Force 58, the fast carrier force of the U.S. Pacific Fleet, steams toward the Mariana Islands with 15 aircraft carriers and nearly 900 aircraft. Opposing them is the Japanese Mobile Fleet, carrying the last great concentration of naval aviation that the empire can muster. The stage is set for what will become known as the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, a battle that will demonstrate once and for all the complete transformation of aerial warfare in the Pacific. At the center of this transformation lies the P-38 Lightning, no longer the experimental curiosity that Japanese pilots mocked in 1942, but a proven weapon of aerial supremacy. Lieutenant Alexander Vatsu, flying from the carrier USS Lexington, spots the first wave of Japanese attackers while on combat air patrol. The formation includes over 60 aircraft, 0 fighters, dive bombers, and torpedo planes, representing one of the largest Japanese aerial attacks since Pearl Harbor. But as Vatsu studies the approaching enemy through his gun sight, he notices something that would have been unthinkable 2 years earlier. The Japanese pilots are flying defensively. bunched together for mutual protection, rather than spread out for maximum offensive impact. The battle that follows unfolds with a one-sided ferocity that shocks even veteran American pilots. Wave after wave of Japanese aircraft dive toward the American fleet, only to be met by coordinated attacks from P-38s and other American fighters. The Lightning pilots, now veterans of 2 years of Pacific combat, execute their attacks with mechanical precision. They dive from altitude, deliver devastating bursts of concentrated firepower, then climb back to safety before Japanese fighters can respond. In a single day, American pilots claim over 400 Japanese aircraft destroyed while losing only 29 of their own. The P-38 Lightning accounts for a significant portion of these victories, its pilots exploiting every advantage that 2 years of combat experience and technological refinement have provided. The end of an era. As the sun sets over the Philippine Sea on June 19, 1944, more than Japanese aircraft burn in the Pacific waters. The myth of Japanese aerial invincibility, built on the ZR's early dominance and the skill of veteran pilots, dies with them. The laughter that once greeted the ungainly twin-tailed Lightning has been replaced by the grim silence of defeat. For the Japanese pilots who survived the Turkey shoot, the lesson is unmistakable. The war in the Pacific skies has been irreversibly transformed. The aircraft they once dismissed as inferior has become the instrument of their destruction, flown by pilots who have learned to maximize every advantage that American industrial might and technological innovation can provide. But the Lightning's dominance represents more than just tactical victory. It embodies the complete transformation of American military aviation from the desperate improvisation of 1942 to the overwhelming superiority of 1944. The fork-tailed devil has proven that wars are won not just by individual courage and skill, but by the ability to produce in massive quantities weapons that give ordinary pilots extraordinary capabilities. The mockery has ended. The reckoning has begun, and in the skies above the Pacific, the twin engines of the P-38 Lightning sing a song of American industrial might that will echo all the way to Tokyo Bay. October 1944. The skies over Later Gulf burn with the fury of the largest naval battle in human history. Below, American and Japanese fleets clash in a desperate struggle that will determine the fate of the Philippines and ultimately the Pacific War itself. Above this maritime carnage, a different kind of battle rages, one that represents the complete reversal of fortune that has transformed aerial warfare in the Pacific. Major Richard Dick Bong, now America's leading ace with 36 confirmed victories, leads a formation of P-38 Lightnings through the smoke-filled sky above the Philippine Islands. 2 years ago, American pilots in this same airspace would have been flying desperately defensive missions, trying to survive against overwhelming Japanese air superiority. Now Bong and his fellow Lightning pilots hunt with the confidence of predators who know their prey can no longer escape. The transformation is complete and devastating. Japanese pilots who once dominated Pacific skies now fly with the hunted desperation of men who know that every mission might be their last. The Zero fighters that seemed invincible in 1942 have become flying coffins, their pilots reduced to hoping they can inflict some damage before the inevitable lightning attack tears them from the sky. But this reversal of fortune tells a deeper story than simple tactical evolution. It represents the triumph of American industrial capacity over Japanese military tradition, of technological innovation over individual skill, of systematic training over warrior mystique. The P-38 Lightning has become more than just a superior fighter aircraft. It has become the instrument through which American industrial might has reshaped the very nature of aerial warfare. The Philippines Crucible. The campaign to retake the Philippines provides the perfect laboratory for demonstrating the Lightning's complete dominance over Japanese aviation. General Douglas MacArthur's return to the islands he was forced to abandon in 1942 depends heavily on achieving absolute air superiority, and the P-38 squadrons of the 5th and 13th Air Forces have become his primary instruments for achieving that goal. Lieutenant Colonel Thomas Maguire flying with the 475th Fighter Group embodies the new generation of Lightning pilots who have learned to exploit every advantage their aircraft provides. McGuire, who will eventually become America's second leading ace with 38 confirmed victories, approaches aerial combat with the methodical precision of an engineer rather than the romantic individualism that characterized earlier fighter pilots. On a typical mission over Luzon in November 1944, McGuire's tactics demonstrate how completely the Lightning has transformed aerial warfare in the Pacific. Leading a formation of 16 P-38s, he spots a Japanese formation attempting to attack American ground forces near Manila. The Japanese pilots, flying a mixture of Zeros and newer aircraft like the Kawasaki K-61 Tony, are flying defensively bunched together for mutual protection. McGuire's response follows the tactical doctrine that Lightning pilots have perfected through 2 years of Pacific combat. Instead of diving immediately into the enemy formation, he positions his aircraft for maximum advantage. Using the P-38's superior climb rate, he gains altitude until his formation holds a commanding position above the Japanese fighters. Then, when conditions are perfect, he strikes with devastating precision. The attack unfolds with mechanical efficiency. McGuire's Lightnings dive in coordinated waves, each pilot selecting a target and delivering a concentrated burst of firepower before climbing back to altitude. The Japanese pilots, hampered by their aircraft's inferior high-altitude performance and their own defensive mindset, can only watch helplessly as their formation disintegrates under the Lightning systematic assault. Within minutes, 8 Japanese aircraft are falling toward the Philippine jungle in flames, while McGuire's formation climbs back to altitude without losing a single aircraft. The engagement represents everything. The Lightning has become fast, deadly, and utterly dominant over opponents who once seemed invincible. The technology of dominance. By late 1944, the P-38 Lightning has evolved into a weapon system that represents the pinnacle of American aviation technology. The P-38L model, now rolling off production lines in unprecedented numbers, incorporates every lesson learned from 3 years of Pacific combat. Its twin Allison V1710 engines, each producing over 1,600 horsepower, give it a top speed of 414 mph and a service ceiling of 44,000 feet. Performance figures that no Japanese fighter can match. But raw performance statistics tell only part of the story. The Lightning's true advantage lies in its systematic integration of multiple technologies that work together to create overwhelming tactical superiority. Its concentrated nose armament eliminates the convergence problems that plague wing-mounted guns. Its twin-engine configuration provides redundancy that allows pilots to survive battle damage that would doom single-engine fighters. Its exceptional range enables operations deep into enemy territory where shorter-range fighters cannot follow. Perhaps most importantly, the Lightning's high-altitude performance allows it to control the vertical dimension of aerial combat. At altitudes above 25,000 ft, where the thin air starves Japanese engines of power, the Lightning's turbocharged engines maintain full performance. This altitude advantage allows Lightning pilots to choose when and where to engage, controlling the tempo of aerial combat in a way that Japanese pilots find increasingly frustrating and ultimately hopeless. The psychological impact of this technological dominance cannot be overstated. Japanese pilots who once approached every engagement with supreme confidence now find themselves scanning empty sky with nervous desperation, knowing that death can dive out of the sun at any moment. Radio intercepts reveal the extent of tactical evolution. Boom and zoom, this psychological transformation. Where Japanese pilots once reported engaging inferior American fighters, they now speak in hushed tones of twin-engine devils that strike without warning and disappear before retaliation is possible. The human dimension. Behind the technological superiority lies a human story that reflects the broader transformation of American military aviation. The Lightning pilots of 1944 represent a new breed of aviator, systematically trained, technologically equipped, and tactically sophisticated in ways that their predecessors could never have imagined. Captain Charles MacDonald, flying with the 475th Fighter Group, exemplifies this evolution. MacDonald, who will finish the war with 27 confirmed victories, approaches aerial combat with the analytical mindset of a professional rather than the romantic individualism that characterized earlier fighter pilots. He studies his opponent's tactics, analyzes their weaknesses, and develops systematic approaches to exploit the Lightning's advantages. In a letter to his wife, MacDonald describes the transformation. The Japanese pilots we're fighting now aren't the same men who attacked Pearl Harbor. Those veterans are mostly dead or grounded. The new pilots are brave enough, but they're flying aircraft that can't match our capabilities, and they're using tactics that worked against P-40s, but a suicide against P-38s. It's almost unfair, except that I remember what they did to us in 1942. This human dimension extends beyond individual pilots to entire squadrons and air group-ups. The Lightning units operating in the Philippines represent the culmination of 3 years of tactical evolution, technological refinement, and systematic training. These pilots know their aircraft's capabilities intimately, understand their opponent's weaknesses completely, and execute their missions with a precision that reflects both superior equipment and superior preparation. The contrast with Japanese aviation becomes increasingly stark as 1944 progresses into 1945. While American pilots arrive in theater with hundreds of hours of flight time and extensive combat training, Japanese pilots are increasingly thrown into combat with minimal preparation. The veteran pilots who once made the Zero so formidable are mostly dead, and their replacements lack both the experience and the aircraft to match American capabilities. The final campaigns. As American forces close in on the Japanese home islands in early 1945, the P-38 Lightning faces its ultimate test, operations over Japan itself. The long-range missions required to escort B-29 bombers from bases in the Marianas to targets in Japan stretch even the Lightning's exceptional capabilities, but they also demonstrate the aircraft's unique suitability for Pacific warfare. The USAAF campaign in February and March 1945 provides a crucial stepping stone for these extended operations. P-38 squadrons operating from the captured airfields on USAAF can now escort bombers all the way to Tokyo and back, a capability that no other Allied fighter possesses. The Lightning's twin-engine reliability proves crucial on these marathon missions where a single-engine failure over the vast Pacific means almost certain death. Major William Shomo flying with the 82nd Fighter Squadron demonstrates the Lightning's continued effectiveness even against Japan's newest fighters. During a mission over Luzon in January 1945, Shomo encounters a formation of Japanese aircraft that includes some of the Empire's most advanced fighters, the Kawasaki K-84 Frank and the Nakajima K-84 Hayate. These aircraft represent Japan's desperate attempt to develop fighters that can match American capabilities. The engagement that follows proves that technological advancement alone cannot overcome the systematic advantages that American pilots now enjoy. Shows P-38 flown with the tactical sophistication that 3 years of combat have developed systematically destroys 7 Japanese aircraft in a single engagement. The Japanese pilots flying superior aircraft, but lacking the training, experience, and tactical doctrine that American pilots have developed, prove helpless against an opponent who has learned to maximize every advantage. The kamikaze response. As conventional Japanese aviation proves increasingly ineffective against American air superiority, the Empire turns to its final desperate expedient, the kamikaze attacks that will characterize the war's final months. The Lightning pilots who once hunted Japanese fighters now find themselves facing opponents who have abandoned all hope of survival in favor of inflicting maximum damage through suicide attacks. The psychological impact of this transformation proves profound for Lightning pilots who have spent 3 years perfecting the art of aerial combat. Captain Richard Dick Bong, now America's leading ace with 40 confirmed victories, describes the change in a letter home. They're not fighting to win anymore. They're fighting to die, and that makes them more dangerous in some ways, even though their aircraft are inferior. You can predict what a rational pilot will do, but how do you fight someone who's already decided to die? The Lightning's superior speed and firepower prove crucial in countering kamikaze attacks. But the psychological toll on American pilots becomes evident. These men who have spent years developing the skills and tactics necessary to dominate Japanese aviation now find themselves facing opponents who have abandoned the very concept of survival that underlies all military aviation. The final victory, August 15, 1945. Emperor Hirohito's surrender announcement crackles over radio frequencies throughout the Pacific, bringing an end to the most destructive conflict in human history. For the P-38 Lightning pilots scattered across airfields from the Philippines to Iwo Jima, the moment represents the culmination of a transformation that began with mockery and ended with absolute dominance. The statistics tell the story with brutal clarity. P-38 Lightning pilots have achieved kill ratios exceeding 10.1 against Japanese opposition, claiming over 1 confirmed victories while losing fewer than 200 aircraft to enemy action. The aircraft that Japanese pilots once dismissed as an ungainly curiosity has become the instrument of their complete aerial defeat. But the Lightning's victory represents more than just tactical success. It embodies the triumph of American industrial capacity over Japanese military tradition, of systematic training over individual heroism, of technological innovation over warrior mystique. The twin-tailed devil has proven that modern warfare belongs not to the most courageous or skillful individual warriors, but to the nation that can most effectively combine industrial production, technological innovation, and systematic training into overwhelming military capability. Legacy and reflection. As the last P-38 Lightning missions fly over the now peaceful Pacific, the aircraft's legacy extends far beyond its impressive combat record. The Lightning has fundamentally transformed the nature of aerial warfare, proving that technological superiority properly applied can overcome even the most skilled and determined opponents. The Japanese pilots who once laughed at the Lightning's ungainly appearance have learned through bitter experience that wars are not won by individual courage or aircraft aesthetics, but by the systematic application of superior technology and tactics. The Zer's elegant lines and legendary maneuverability proved meaningless against an opponent that refused to fight on Japanese terms. For American aviation, the Lightning's success validates the industrial and technological approach that will characterize military aviation for decades to come. The aircraft's twin-engine configuration, concentrated armament, and emphasis on pilot protection established design principles that will influence fighter development well into the jet age. But perhaps the Lightning's most important legacy lies in its demonstration that air superiority, once achieved through superior technology and tactics, can be maintained and exploited to achieve decisive strategic results. The aircraft that began the war as an experimental curiosity ended it as the instrument through which American air power achieved complete dominance over the Pacific. The laughter has long since died. The mockery has been replaced by respect, then fear, then the silence of defeat. In the end, the P-38 Lightning proved that in modern warfare, the last laugh belongs not to the most elegant or traditional design, but to the aircraft that most effectively combines technological innovation with tactical sophistication. The fork-tailed devil has had its revenge, and the skies over the Pacific will never be the same. Closing reflection. The story of the P-38 Lightning in the Pacific War is ultimately a story about transformation. The transformation of American aviation from desperate improvisation to overwhelming superiority. The transformation of aerial tactics from individual heroism to systematic warfare. And the transformation of the Pacific theater from Japanese dominance to American victory. When Japanese pilots first encountered the Lightning in 1942, their laughter reflected a confidence born of 2 years of uninterrupted victory. They had good reason for that confidence. Their aircraft was superior, their pilots were experienced, and their tactics had proven devastatingly effective against every opponent they had faced. But they failed to recognize that they were witnessing the birth of a new kind of warfare, one in which individual skill and aircraft elegance would prove less important than industrial capacity and technological innovation. The Lightning represented not just a new aircraft, but a new approach to aerial combat that would fundamentally reshape the nature of air warfare. The transformation was neither immediate nor inevitable. It required 3 years of bitter combat, thousands of hours of tactical development, and the systematic application of American industrial might to achieve the dominance that characterized the war's final campaigns. But once achieved, that dominance proved so complete that Japanese aviation never recovered. Today, as we look back on this transformation, we can see in the lightning success a preview of the technological warfare that would characterize the remainder of the 20th century and beyond. The aircraft that Japanese pilots once mocked as ungainly has become a symbol of the systematic approach to military technology that continues to shape modern warfare. The twin-tailed devil proved that in war, as in so many other human endeavors, the last laugh belongs not to those who begin with confidence, but to those who combine innovation, determination, and the systematic application of superior resources to achieve their goals. The P-38 Lightning didn't just win air superiority over the Pacific. It redefined what air superiority could accomplish when properly applied. The laughter that once echoed through Japanese fighter squadrons has been replaced by the eternal silence of history. But the lessons of the Lightning's triumph continue to resonate, reminding us that in the crucible of conflict, technological innovation and systematic preparation can overcome even the most formidable opponents. The fork-tailed devil has earned its place in history, not just as a superior fighter aircraft, but as the instrument through which American aviation learned to dominate the skies and ultimately to win the war.